Welcome to Property Quorum. There's been a slight changing of the guard, but you'll recognise a lot of these faces because they've been here before, frankly. Of course, Hamish McClare, our Lord and Master, who set the whole thing up, and Juliet Babula, stalwart of the channel. Along with her, she brings along Karen Obadiah, who is, in fact, working with Juliet, so has got commentary and thoughts of his own. And dear Michelle Carr, the guardian angel of construction, is here to give her 2 pennies as well. So we better stay in line. All right. Before anything else happens, of course, as is traditional in this channel, I'm going to throw Hamish straight under the bus.
Well, one of those, that happens most weeks, I think, on most occasions. I'm merely an observer because the experts surround us. So I come up with the, and I learn an awful lot as a consequence of the subject. Now, interestingly enough, my particular sort of part in the whole sort of conveyancing sort of process is fairly limited. The basic on which I'm a specialist, so I do collaborate in a number of other aspects. And I get to view, and particularly did earlier on when I was diving in and out of the council offices, gathering all this information about what was going on relative to a property, we would come across a lot of things. And what we needed, of course, to get anything to proceed was the planning permission. Once the planning permission came through, away we would go. Now, what I would notice quite a lot, because at the very, very front end of the search that I carry out, the conditional approvals. These are charges against that particular property, and all of those have to be met in order to complete the building of the property. However, having the planning permission gone through, it doesn't necessarily mean everything's actually in line for everything to go straight forward. Because sometimes hang on, we can't get hold of that material. We need to change, because that was one of the conditions. It needed to be made of a particular type of material. It has to be carried out within a particular time frame. Crikey, we hadn't met that time. There's various things that can actually sort of come in which knock it forward. Now, unfortunately, Michelle, of course, in her particular, one of her roles, particularly looking what's going on within the development, can see all these holdups coming through sort of all the time. Juliet and Karen, on the other hand, they're the ones that have to push through these changes because there's legal change. So these things have to actually sort of be changed in terms of what's sort of going on. So those there, the people who actually have to put up with the complications, and I just sit back and look.
Well, first of all, I take issue with you calling yourself not an expert. You're the expert data hound, if anything. But Michelle and I are engaged in completing the second series of her podcast, which is taking the con out of construction. Her favorite topic begins with the letter C. Yes, the contract. And I thought that once you are committed to that, that's it. We're there.
Yeah, but the planning comes way before the contract. So
there you go.
In order for a project to go ahead, and in order for it to be out, to get into contract, to go out to tender, you need to have the planning either accepted in principle or at least in the final negotiation stages. Now, what happens is you'll have planning, for example, so they'll have design, they'll come up with some materials, and then when the planning conditions are issued, there's where the planning approval is issued, there's a heap of conditions. And I mean, I've had planning approvals that are 9, 10, 12, 15 pages long with numerous different conditions that need to be discharged at different points. So as Hamish said, sometimes you'll say that one product's going to be on the exterior, and generally it's the exterior that they're most concerned about rather than the interior, because that's dealt with other things. That all of a sudden that product isn't available anymore, or what happens most of all is it goes out to tender, and when that design is priced, it's not viable commercially. So there are a lot of things, of some ideas that look amazing on paper, and then when you try to build them, either they're not buildable because you've had not a technical architect, or you haven't had the experts look at the project until it gets to that stage. So you get planning approval, then it goes up to tender, and then there's a design process, and then you have to go back to planning to get those changes approved and get them discharged before you can either start working. There's other conditions that need to be discharged before you can commence. There's other things before you can occupy. There's a number of different, and then there's conditions that have to be discharged X amount of days after occupation. So there's lots of different things, but ultimately what ends up happening is whatever was designed in the first place and approved by planning is not deliverable under the costs that make the project viable in the first place. So if the conditions and what has been designed outweighs the financial contribution and the fact that the return on that investment, whatever it may be, then the project doesn't go ahead.
This all sounds very stressful. Juliet, is Michelle right? Can it be that even though you've got the approval and everything's go ahead, it doesn't necessarily mean that anything's really going to happen?
Well, this is it. I mean, especially if that developer or the owner of the land needs development finance. So, for example, someone will come to me, they'll bring a planning permission, and what you find is that you've got these pre-commencement conditions that Michelle is talking about, and those need to be discharged first before you can actually commence the work. And so you've got to bear that in mind when you're looking at your development milestones. And often developers don't look at that, or, you know, if they're newbie developers and they haven't got the right professionals guiding them, that's a big mistake to make, because often you think, look, I'm just going to get the finance, I'm going to go on the site, I'm going to start the work. Well, actually, you can't start the work until you send an ecological report that gets signed off by the local authority. And that, again, you have no timescales or timeframes in which they can take to sign that off. You know, what I found as well is that sometimes the planners or the people putting the planning permission together, they'll prepare plans. They'll send that through to the local authority. They'll get approved. When it comes to me, I'm looking at the site plan, so the actual boundaries of the property, and I'm looking at the plan on the planning permission. And often you find people they've got planning permission to build a car park, but it's going into someone else's land. It's outside of their boundary. And you kind of think, well, how is it that these people aren't paralleled insofar as, well, that land doesn't belong to you. You can't get planning on it, and you certainly can't implement planning on that piece of land. So what then do you do? Do you negotiate with the neighbor to buy the bit of land over which the car park is going to be? Or do you go back to the local authority and vary the planning so that the planning permission is within the ambit of your property? And so that kind of thing creates a lot of complexities. One of the things I wanted to say to our viewers, and a top tip here, and this is a problem that I'm seeing throughout, lenders are going to want a copyright license over the plans on the planning permission. And often you find that a developer or a borrower or a proprietor of a property will go to an architect to get these plans drawn, and they don't bother to work out or to say to the architect, look, the copyright belongs to me. I'm paying for that plan, so I should have the copyright. So what you find is sort of months down the line, the lender's saying, I want a copyright license. The proprietor is approaching the architect for this copyright license, and the architect wants to charge for it, or the architect might have gone bust. And so then you think, well, where's the copyright? Does it belong to the trustee in bankruptcy of that architect? So it's a whole host of issues. So when you talk about contracts, and I think this is where Michelle is, far superior than any other professional that I've seen here. When you talk about getting those contracts right, you have to put in that contract with that architect upfront that copyright belongs to you because you've paid for it. They have no use for that drawing anymore. So you should be able to take that planning permission, use it as you want to, sub-license it to whoever you need to. If you need to sell it with the benefit of planning, you can sell on the benefit of the copyright of the plans. So there are these little kinky tweaks or little things within the planning that if you had the right guidance, you could get it right up front and not waste a lot of time. But it's not simply a matter of, oh, I've got the planning now. That's when the hard work actually begins. And one of the things about those conditions as well is that, yes, you might have conditions that could be discharged straight away, but I'm seeing a trend where there's ongoing monitoring conditions. And so you can't just say, okay, I'm doing this today and I'm not going to bother with it, in a couple of months' time. It's something, especially those like archaeological conditions, where if you're developing a basement or digging into a basement or whatever, and you find archaeological remains, the site has to stop. You've got to call the archaeological society in to look at those remains, and God knows you might have a full-blown injunction to stop working if the remains are found to be remains that they need to do further investigations on. So my view is pay for the reports, pay for the expertise up front so that you don't have these hiccups or these things thrown at you, which will eventually cost you in time and expense.
Michelle, it just seems to me that why would anyone start one of these things? It just looks like it's an excuse for something to go wrong. There's so many unknowns.
Well, I have this quite a lot. So I work with a lot of international investors, and they just don't understand the construction industry at all and the risk associated with it. There are a lot of risks in construction. However, there are also some incredible rewards. So it's probably one of the industries where you can make, if you do it properly, you can make a lot of money. And obviously it's a lifelong investment. Property is always going up. It never really goes down. It might go down a little bit, but not a lot. The rental, obviously here in the housing market, there's not enough houses, so and so, and that's why people do it. But what happens in construction, the entire industry, is people that aren't within the industry, and it's a whole different world, think it's easy, and it really is not. And the problem, I think, with the construction industry is lack of education, lack of experience, and lack of the use of consultants. So if I'm doing a project and I don't know exactly what I'm doing in a certain aspect of it, I employ a professional until I've figured it out, if I need to figure it out. But even when I do figure it out, I'd much rather rely on somebody else's PI insurance than my own. So I always get an architect to do the plans. I always get structural engineers to have a look. I get a building control specialist, a private one, to give me some advice and things like that. So I'm always looking at using professionals and outsourcing where I need to. And a lot of people just think it's easy. Oh, if so-and-so can. And there's a bit of arrogance, I think. People come into the industry being really arrogant. Oh, if they can do it, I can do it. Because even in schools, I find a lot of my clients who are subcontractors that I'm supporting, their lack of confidence started in school because they were told, basically, you're not academic, so you need to do a trade, like it's a second-class thing. But actually, there are academic people, which I'm academic, but I'm not particularly, like, I have plastered walls, I've laid floors because I've had to. I'm not good at it, but I can do it. And there's things that I can do on a spreadsheet that will wrap rings around most people, but then there's other things that people can build furniture and make something beautiful and artistic, and everyone has a different skill set. But the problem with the industry is arrogance, I think, generally. People come in, think it's easy, they don't listen to planning conditions, then all of a sudden they cannot occupy their premises. And I've seen councils shut these places down and hold entire sites ready to go, and no one can occupy. They don't listen to people like Julia. I mean, why people employ solicitors and don't listen to them, I really don't know. And they just think that they know better. And that is the danger of this industry. And unless you're employing the right professionals and listening to them, you have to have the right ones. Obviously, we're not all equal, but when people don't employ the right professionals, and like for big projects, you need planning advisors, but you also need to listen to those planning advisors because they know what you can and can't get away with. And Juliet's right. There are so many people that just ignore planning conditions and just get on with it, and they'll take the fine. But because the fine isn't worth like the reward of the investment for them and the return they're going to get, the fine is nothing. But actually, I think councils have stepped up to that and really become aware of it, and they are monitoring, and they will turn up and they will shut your site down. They have that power. And I don't know if there's it depends on who you know type scenario there. I don't know, but I have seen a lot of it. But yeah, planning isn't quite as easy as people think it is, and getting it discharged is really difficult. And sometimes it takes months because of the backlog. So yeah, it's not quite as simple as people think.
Wow. Karen, welcome to the show. You'll need to unmute yourself, I'm afraid. I just want to see, you're relatively recently involved in this bleeding edge of property law and so on. You must see this from the sidelines. It scares the pants off me that you can make such a small mistake and suddenly invalidate your entire show.
Well, yes, Gareth, being sort of a rookie here, I don't really have, such nuanced experience into this as everyone else on the panel here. But, in what I've seen here, especially is that at its heart, planning permission it is about building it is about balancing private interests with the public good. And, it raises questions like, should a development go ahead, or will it serve the community or just the developer who's getting it done? Or will it strain local infrastructure, So these are sort of decisions that ripple out far beyond the individual project. I think they affect housing affordability, the economic growth, and especially one of the most important points of modern sort of timeline, sustainability. So I think I would like to speak a bit more about the sustainability aspect of planning permission.
Go ahead.
If that's all right, and I can go ahead.
You're doing very well, sir.
Thank you. So I think it's very interesting when it gets to sustainability, because if we are serious about tackling climate change and environmental degradation, then we have to talk about planning. Every new building or road or retail park that's built, it has a footprint that it carries. And planning permission will it generally helps control whether we build on a green belt land, or whether we regenerate older brownfield sites. And it's important to understand how it mandates energy efficient designs, low carbon footprint materials, install proper insulation. This can help shape compact walkable communities instead of just communities which are now sprawling car reliant suburbs. So I think the system right now isn't absolutely perfect, but there's a lot of potential there. If the planning permission is used boldly and intelligently, I think it becomes more than just a regulatory and bureaucratic step. It becomes a climate tool and a way to deliver greener homes, stronger communities, a livable future. But it's something that will take a little bit of time with the rapidly changing policies that everybody has to deal with, and with recently there has been a lot of funding cuts for public authority, local authorities, for planning authorities. So I think there has been quite a shift, and it will take a bit of time to build it better, but there is a lot of potential there.
Well, it turns out that your recruit, Juliet, is a zealot. But the thing is he right? Because do now all modern planning permissions and what was based on need to be environmentally conscious as a necessary part?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you see it all on the new planning permissions, etc. There's a condition that they always put in there in terms of, sort of the electronic charges and things like that, or being more green. There are actually lenders out there who will give you incentives if you if you build green, so to speak. So yeah, that absolutely. I mean, it goes hand in hand. You look at a situation like, sort of, for example, older buildings with asbestos, which causes, a lot of detrimental effects. And you look at the materials that you're required to build or use now, which is meant to just be good for the environment. The issue that I've got, and Karen is absolutely right in terms of budgets being cut, etc., is policing that. Because we've had people on this show before who've said, look, I've got a new build that's been signed off. They've got the completion certificates and stuff, and the walls aren't insulated in the way that they're supposed to do. So you're not meant to take these shortcuts or just not look at and pay heed to these conditions. So the reality is we all have to do our job. I say as lawyers, we just paper push. We look at the paper. We don't actually see what's going out, on the floor or what's on the site. And that's why we need all the stakeholders within this sort of realm to play their part.
Wow. Michelle, before I give the last word to Hamish, would you respond to that, please?
Yeah, Juliet's right. I mean, I had a number of issues with my own property. I mean, it's 6 years old now. But yeah, they didn't put the insulation in right. They didn't put certain things in. They put most of the fire barriers in, but there's lots of things they didn't do. The houses were supposed to be airtight. They're not. And yeah, they get the planning permissions, but actually not many people do check it. Now, that is the responsibility of the contractor. And it's very difficult to put that responsibility on the homeowner, but that's buying the property, because they must have people. When you're buying a property, you do need to do a bit of due diligence. You do have a responsibility. It's a big purchase, but there doesn't seem, I mean, people expect building control to check quality. They don't. And what they can do, especially in bigger, I mean, it's the big housing developments that need to have stricter rules, because ultimately they will use one property or maybe 5 properties out of 20 or 25 or 30 that need to get airtight tested. They know which ones they are, so they make sure that those houses are done properly and the rest of them aren't. And they need to have stricter guidance. And actually, I think they need massive fines on contractors, big contractors, where they go in and they do investigation and they find out that they haven't done what they're supposed to do. That needs to happen and change the industry, because it's the small companies that do it. And I do it for a lot of my clients, I make sure that they're getting what they paid for, and whether it's photographic or going and looking at myself, but I've got no qualms in getting someone to prove that they've installed what they're supposed to install. Building control do some aspect of it, but yeah, I think what the government really needs to do is hold these big companies that can afford to do it properly accountable, because they have, rather than crucifying the small ones.
Wow. So regulations without teeth are no regulation at all. Hamish, would you please take us home?
I think we're drawn into that topic, sort of, which comes up all too often. Regulation is there for good purpose, and sadly, this is what is causing the challenges, or many of the challenges we have within the building sector completely. But I mean, again, it demonstrates from everybody that's actually been speaking here today the actually changing role. When we go back 20, 25 years ago, what was expected from a property lawyer was a certain aspect of being able to sort of work. As Juliet said, it was mostly an administrative sort of type of thing. And then, as Karen actually sort of brings in, we're now starting to look at, when looking at the overseeing of that, does it all sort of seem to fit together in terms of, we do need to look at climate. We don't need to be necessarily experts as lawyers, but there's an additional burden that's put upon them. You start bringing the anti-money laundering and all these other things that are expected of the lawyer in this particular proceeding. Then, of course, there's Miss Michelle, because she's actually sort of sees, well, all of these regulations do keep changing. So we can actually see why there is a hold-up, because many of these changes do have to go back to planning, and they are overstretched, and they're getting progressively worse because they're making many local authorities into unitary authorities. So they're not having available enough of the local people to be able to actually give that full planning consent. So that's stretching things a bit. So we can actually sort of see why there's so many stop-starts. It's not just a matter of saying yes and away we go. And we've heard so many reasons why that doesn't happen. So let's prep it right. Let's speak to the right experts, speak to the right professionals before we take those steps forward.
Wow, yet another school day for me. It turns out that just because you got it written down on a piece of paper, it means sod all, unless you get all the other things line up. Amazing. So once again, I say to all of you, thank you so much for attending today. Of course, Michelle Carr, Guardian Angel of Construction. Please do watch and listen to her podcast, Taking the Con Out of Construction, available on all good podcasting platforms, if I can say the words. The initial appearance for Karen Obadiah, thank you so much. Excellent work, sir. And Juliet Babula of Gunnar Cook, always sage words in a turgid sea of madness. And Hamish McClay, a Lord and Master, who helps us pull this whole thing together. And I say to all of you out there, there is good stuff on the horizon, and regulation, there is a point to its existence. It's not just there to confound the money makers. It's there to keep us from pitching straight into a crevasse, I think. And until next time, please keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the sky, and please look after that mental health. Until next week, bye-bye now.